to Beyond the Boardroom, the podcast for leaders, changemakers, and purpose-driven souls who believe business can be both powerful and human. I'm your host, Demiri, founder of JD Consulting, culture shaper, connection creator, and champion for authentic, connected leadership. Here we go deeper than metrics and meetings. We explore the real stories, raw moments, and bold ideas that shape how we lead and who we become in the process. From workplace culture to conscious strategy, from self-leadership to systems that truly serve, this is where heart meets business. So grab a coffee, take a breath, and join me as we go beyond the boardroom. Welcome back to Beyond the Boardroom, leading with purpose and connection. Today's episode is a deeper exploration of leadership. Not just what we do as leaders, but who we are when we lead. I'm joined by Kathryn Van Der Steege, an executive coach and leadership advisor who helps leaders develop from the inside out. With a senior executive background across IT and HR at Woolworths, Kathryn brings both strong commercial experience and deep transformational expertise. For more than 15 years, she's worked across emotional intelligence, neuroscience-informed coaching, somatic practice, and nervous system regulation, helping leaders stay clear, grounded, and decisive, even under pressure. In this conversation, we're exploring leadership through a slightly different lens. Human design as the leadership framework, or what Kathryn also refers to as the inner compass of leadership. We'll unpack how understanding your own design can support better decision-making, clearer communication, and more sustainable energy management as a leader. Not as a rigid system, but as a reflective tool for self-awareness and performance. Kathryn's work sits at the intersection of neuroscience, somatic awareness, and practical leadership development, helping leaders understand the patterns that sit beneath behavior so they can lead with more presence, conviction, and alignment, especially in complex and high-pressure environments. Today's conversation is really about one thing. What changes when leaders stop trying to override themselves and instead learn how to lead in alignment with how they're actually wired? If you've ever felt like you are performing leadership rather than fully living it, this episode will give you a new lens to explore that experience. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you so much for having me. It's just fantastic to be here today. And even listening to you read out the intro, I'm really excited to dive into this conversation.
Well, thank you. Well, let's start straight away. So you've moved from senior executive roles in IT and HR into deep transformational coaching. What triggered that shift for you?
It's such a great question. I worked for Woolworths for 28 years and I actually started as a checkout operator, and I went into IT and I just sort of took each role as it came, and there wasn't really a lot of design to my career until my early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really powerful experience, my own powerful experience with understanding the nervous system. And it just opened me up to a world of wanting to know more, wanting to know about the brain, wanting to know about neuroscience. And then I went on to get a coaching qualification, a neuro leadership qualification, and I started coaching and taking on people. You know, I was working for Woolworths and I was in IT, and at the time, Woolworths was Australia's largest private employer. And I just remember my boss saying to me at the time, he was like, "Kath, you're the most senior and capable female leader in Woolworths IT, and you're in the box seat for a GM role." He goes, "But you have to decide." He goes, "You have to decide between coaching and neuroscience, or if you're going to follow this IT career." And, you know, it was really just that choice point at the fork in the road. I had this great career and I had this great executive career, but I was also doing this coaching that I loved. And it was almost to the point where I think he was getting a bit sick of me talking about the brain in every conversation. So he's like, you need to decide.
Yeah.
And I did go into coaching at Woolworths, and then eventually went out and went on my own and have pursued it. So that's how I made that pivot. And it is really interesting because I did a talk just 2 weeks ago at the CX Symposium with a lot of the customer experience leaders. And I actually shared that story. And a number of the leaders came up to me and said, we really admire your courage for stepping out and doing that and, following that path. So it's been a great journey. And that's how I ended up where I am today.
Yeah. And I can absolutely relate to that courage of changing things and doing things differently to what is expected. When I started my business, so many people were saying, oh my God, I couldn't live with that uncertainty of having your own business. And yeah, that really is sort of like, for me, I couldn't go back to a corporate role in that sense. So yes, to me, it's just like, well, I couldn't imagine doing anything different to what I do now.
And I think that's so important. Like those people who are saying to you, I can't imagine you doing it. Like I think for everybody listening or watching this podcast today, like I just want to acknowledge everyone who is listening, who's here, because they say that only 2% of the population will ever actually changing it out of their comfort zone. So there's 98% of the population who will live their lives inside of their comfort zone. And so what you and I have both done is sort of found the edge of the comfort zone and gone outside. And I dare say that everybody listening to this podcast or watching are likely part of the 2%. They're likely people who know that there's more to what they're experiencing now, are willing to try things differently in order to go after that. So just acknowledging all the listeners today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and while we're on the comfort zone, I guess it leads into my next question. So when you look back at your corporate experience, what patterns in leadership behavior stood out to you? And I guess, yeah, it leads a little bit into that, or has to do with the comfort zone a little bit, because in a way, a continuous pattern of behavior is part of the comfort zone, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how deep do you want to go? How quickly? I think for me, a lot of my journey in learning about neuroscience, learning about the brain, learning about nervous system has also been learning about the impact of trauma. So if you experience trauma at some stage in your life, what that does to a nervous system. And so I learned that because I had an experience of trauma earlier in my life, once I started to do the nervous system work and the neuroscience work, is that because at an early stage in life, there was an experience that happened to me which left me feeling unsafe, a way for me to return to safety in my body was to control. So whether that was at home and cleaning up after the kids or cleaning the kitchen benches, but how this showed up in work was when in the early days when I very first went into leadership roles, I was so much more of a micromanager and I was so much more of a control. And I remember like working on the help desk, the IT help desk, and it's like when we had what they call a Sev 1, so a whole store was down or a whole warehouse was down. Like I would just go into this state of telling people what to do. We've got to do this. We've got to. And it was actually one of my really good friends. She's now called it out to me. She's like, "Hey, it's like what's going on? It's like you change or you just get so hyper focused. Like just chill." And as I went through that journey of understanding about the brain, I learned about the impact. So one of my patterns, to answer your question, that I noticed was how I controlled or micromanaged in the early days. So I had to learn nervous system regulation and learn not to control, learn to be able to delegate, learn to be able to influence. So that was one aspect of a pattern I noticed. But another really interesting pattern that I noticed for myself is, I guess, the size and scale of Woolworths. I remember someone saying to me once, Kath, you're really good at influencing and you don't know how hard that is inside of an organisation like Woolworths. So for someone coming in externally, they find it hard to influence. And I was like, well, I don't understand this because I've grown up in this organization and I just know people and I have conversations. And it was actually when I did my strengths profile. So the Gallup Strengths is a tool that I love and I use with my clients alongside human design. and it gives you your top 34 strengths. And then they look at the top 5 and what domains they're in. And there's 4 domains being strategy, influence, relationship, or execution. And, I would look at other people who seem to be like project managers and rolling out things and doing great things and compare myself and have a bit of imposter syndrome. But then I realized that my top strengths are in strategy and influence. And so while I wasn't necessarily the one executing or getting the job done, I was definitely influencing a lot of decisions, a lot of change, a lot of initiatives in this very large organization, which someone else came in. So when you talk about what are the patterns across leadership, like I had to really understand what were my strengths, how they played out, and also how I played to them, and stop trying to be somebody that I wasn't.
I think you just said a really key word there, trying to stop being someone that you weren't, because I feel a lot of people do that. A lot of people feel, especially in leadership, they have to become person X or person Y. They have to be perfect. They have to be able to do this. They have to be able to do this, rather than realizing everyone does have their strength, and hiring in a way that you actually have people around you that can do stuff that you can't. And you bring to the table stuff that they don't know or are unaware of. And this is how a team actually works. You're bringing all these different components together and make them work together rather than against each other. So I think that that's actually a really important point there. And to the point of, the different leadership behaviors and the patterns, yes, you're totally right. A lot of it comes from trauma. And that's also where I work deeply with. I find out what the patterns are and then work through that to help people change their patterns and behaviors. So,
I think what's so key to that is like the way that you and I probably both work is that concept of, and this happens so much in the corporate environment, is that there's the conscious and the unconscious.
Yeah.
So we know that the conscious is 5% and the unconscious is 95%. And our patterns reside in the unconscious because they're formed from a very young age.
Yes.
They're in there. We often suppress them, don't realize that they're there. And you would know this from working with your clients, and that's where you would take them. And what you can reveal is so interesting. But the key thing is that in the corporate environment, we've been so conditioned to put the conscious filter on everything. The unconscious is often that first thought, that first thing that comes to mind. But if we say the first thing that comes to mind in a corporate environment, we're going to be marched down to the HR office and, we're going to be reprimanded or potentially be walked out the door. And so we learn in that corporate environment to apply the conscious filter. And it's like we have some tricky stakeholders. So we need to, massage the message in a certain way so it's received in a certain way. And what I find over time is we then actually become conditioned that the conscious filter becomes unconscious.
Yes.
So we unconsciously filter everything. And what happens is we start to filter out our true self.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's my purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So what does leadership from the inside out actually mean in practice?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think it comes back to really what I've just talked about there with that conscious filter that's triggering in the unconscious way. Like for years and years, and you just touched on it, Jem, when you said that, people have come into leadership and they feel like they have to be the best or they have to be a certain way or there's levels of perfection or levels of expertise. And what we're really seeing now, particularly in the age of AI, is that the leadership advantage is changing. So in the past, it was about what you knew, the knowledge that you had. It was about your competence. It was about your expertise. And it was very heavily delivery and output. So you were known for what you did. But with AI and information becoming so much more available and so much more accessible, the knowledge factor is not so important and the competence factor is obviously important, but capabilities is changing. And we need to come back to the humanness and the inner compass. And so what happens is, like, under pressure, if a leader still has these patterns that are running in their unconscious, they can get hijacked. So I think, many people will have experienced, and maybe you've had this yourself, Jen, you've been in a meeting, someone's asked you a question and your mind goes blank. And you're like, I know the answer to that, but right now I can't actually access that answer. And that's really frustrating. And, that's an example of us being hijacked. And how I've worked with clients is I help them to regulate in those moments and come back, because their inner compass knows how to access the information that they need. Their inner compass knows what direction we need to go in. But in the moments where we're getting hijacked, it gets loud, it gets confusing, it gets messy, and we lose that signal to the inner compass. So practically is I take people back to understanding what their yes and their no is. Actually, like, can we try something with the audience right now? And I'll try it with you, if that's okay. Can we play with this a little bit? Let's play, because the brain loves play, and we learn through play. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, yes or no answers. And I just want you to notice what your yes or your no sounds like or feels like in your body. All right. Are you ready? And we'll talk about it after the end. So we'll go through all 5. So, and everyone who's listening or watching can play along. Do you like broccoli?
Yes.
Do you like the snow?
Yes.
Do you like Donald Trump?
I'm unsure.
Do you like cats?
Yes.
Amazing. Do you like the color brown?
No.
Great. I needed to get you a no for this to fully work. Okay. So how was that for you? When I asked you, do you like broccoli? And it was a pretty clear yes. What happened for you?
Felt very lit up inside. That's probably the best I can explain it. So it felt like rays of sunshine came through my body and out. That's
awesome.
I would describe it.
I love that. When I said, do you like the color brown? Yes. And you got a no, what happened?
I felt like it's sort of sagging in my body and it's going down.
Amazing. When I said, this is great, because that is your inner compass.
Yeah.
When I said you like Donald Trump and you're like, I'm not sure, what was that like?
So initially I wanted to say no. And then I was like, well, I can't actually answer that because I only know him, in inverted commas, based on what I see on the media, what, is portrayed. Of course, the likelihood that he is like that as a person is very high. And though I felt I don't actually have enough information to make an informed decision on that.
Amazing.
Which was really interesting because, of course, every person judges, right? Like, there's no exception. Everyone judges, I judge. And sometimes I judge myself worse than everyone else ever could. And I think that's with everyone. However, I also like to give people the benefit of the doubt at the same time while I am judging. So it's like, with that one, I felt like I don't actually know enough of him or about him, only what I see on socials. And that is a very, like, everyone can be made a good person or an evil person depending on how much media pushes, right?
Yeah. I think the key thing here is that was just such a beautiful representation of your inner compass, because for like broccoli and snow, it was a yes.
Yeah.
And like for broccoli, you had that sunshine coming up out of your body. So for you, it's really visceral, maybe even visual, but it was feeling. And then with the brown, it was like a no and a sinking. So
Yeah.
that's your body is a compass. And for you, you felt it. For some people, they will get a really clear auditory yes or a no. So their inner compass is more sounding or auditory, whereas yours was in the body. Some people, when they played that game with us, they would have got an uh-huh for their yes or a uh-uh for their no. And so that's a really beautiful practical example of what the inner compass was. And I love that with the Donald Trump example, you didn't get the yes, you didn't necessarily get the no, you got an unsure and you went, I actually need more information. And this is leaders can tap into this as a tool for themselves. But what happens is, like in the noise, in the pressure, like certainly people who are in corporate environments, people who are founders running their own business, they'll understand that there can be a lot of noise. Like there's a lot to get done. And when the nervous system elevates, when stress rises, and we move up into our head and we start overthinking and we get patterns of like thinking, feeling, overthinking, and it all gets noisy, the signal of our inner compass gets drowned out. So I work with leaders to help them bring them back to their own signal, because it's our signal, our inner compass, that helps us not only navigate in the day-to-day moments, but also in those bigger transitions, which is what I work with a lot of my clients with. They've got a really big pivot or transition in their life that they're navigating.
Yeah. And
that was fun. That was fun for me. It always is
it
to
was,
see what people's reactions are.
no, it's fun for me as well. And the thing is, I do that a lot with myself. So every time I make a decision in my business, I do those sort of things. And the people that watch the video, they would have seen that when you started sort of that we're playing this game, that I actually took a moment, closed my eyes, and was breathing. So if people actually pay attention watching the video, and of course you can rewind and watch it back, they would have seen I closed my eyes, sat back, put my shoulders down, started breathing to regulate my nervous system and actually allow my body to trust the answer that is coming up.
Yeah.
So now I'm curious, if I would have been under high pressure, how could my answers have been different or impacted to your questions? Let's say I would have been on a treadmill running or, at a really high pace, because I wouldn't have had that time to regulate myself. So
I love
what would that look like?
Yeah, look, I love that question. And, I teach this because I teach it to leaders because we need to be able to regulate in the moments that matter. So in that meeting room where you can't leave, when you're delivering a presentation to the board, when you're having the hard conversation with the direct report, you do need this. And I actually love that you did regulate, because that is something that I teach the people that I work with, because when the stress response is activated and fight or flight is activated, we lose access to the part of the brain that knows. They call it the prefrontal cortex. It's the executive functions, planning, reason, logic. And that's why that mind goes blank. We get that feeling. Some people get butterflies. And honestly, breath is the quickest thing that will bring you back to regulation, because there is the longest nerve in the body is called the vagus nerve. It goes from the back of the brain stem all the way down the back, and it connects the central nervous system. And your vagus nerve is responsible for triggering or turning off that fight or flight system. So when people are in those moments and under pressure, taking that big breath helps. So that's for your meeting room example. You're in the board. Some people might find that actually they are under heightened stress. So it's probably going a little bit deep for the science. People who like science will like this. It's called polyvagal theory, and it is about the nervous system, and we have a window of tolerance. And when we're inside our window of tolerance, like we can handle the small day-to-day stresses. Like we're resilient. We can bounce back. But if stress accumulates over time, what will happen is we can either have hyper arousal, so we're getting like triggered and angry, like we're keyboard warriors, we're firing back, and then we go, I really wish I hadn't sent that email just then. Or if there's heightened stress for too long, there can be hypoarousal. And those are the moments where it's gotten so much, We don't even want to get out of bed and face the day. And I know I've experienced all the ranges of those. And so if you're in your window of tolerance and it's the micro, it's the okay, things are coming at me and I need to be resilient. The deep breath is really great. Being able to reframe, change the story that you're telling yourself is great. Or I also take clients through understanding what their values are and how they pivot and align to their values, because in those moments of stress, we don't actually lose our values, we trade them. And then when you go into hyperarousal or hypoarousal, that's when you need more than just breath. That's more than one big deep breath is not going to get you back to regulation and what you need. And you need to be looking at more physical movement, nervous system work, whether it's breath work, whether it is deeper coaching, those sorts of modalities. So hopefully that makes sense. And I love that you took the breath at the beginning and you did that. There was something that I wanted to touch on there, because you said it yourself, like when you took that breath, I think you touched on the thing around self-trust. So that's the other thing, is that a lot of people can access their inner compass. So they'll get their hit, they'll get their yes, they'll get their no, or they'll get their sunshine coming up through their body or their sinking feeling, but then they won't trust the signal. So that's the other way that I work with clients. And that is actually a beautiful, almost even segue into some of the work that I do with human design, because whether it's the Gallup Strengths or whether it's human design, they are frameworks to help us understand ourselves, our leadership, what we're naturally good at, so that when we get the signal, when we get the yes, when we get the no, we can trust it and move. Because what happens to a lot of leaders is they'll get the signal, they'll get the yes, but then particularly in human design, if they've got what's called an open ajna, the open ajna likes to have all the yeses before we move forward. So they'll get the hit to go and maybe do the crazy thing. Okay, we're going to go for that big role. We're going to go for that next role. And so we get the hit, the internal compass goes yes, but then we want to go, but can I do the job? Who will my leader be? Who will my direct reports will be? Like, will I be in the office, out of the office? What projects will I be working on? And wants to know all of the yeses before it moves forward. And, you know, for some people, like my clients with their open ajnas, I have to bring them back to self-trust. I have to bring them back to be able to trust to move without all the yeses being answered.
Yeah. And I love how you just did the segue yourself into human design, because my next question would have been, for someone that is completely new to human design, that has no idea what we're talking about, how would you explain it in a grounded way that it's not so mystical? Or so how would you explain it?
Yeah, I love that. And I think, you know, human design, it's a framework for understanding how we make decisions under pressure.
Mm-hmm.
It's a framework for how we communicate, so communication styles.
Mm-hmm.
It's a framework for energy patterns. So energy can sometimes be a bit of a, what do you mean by energy? But I think we've all experienced that feeling where there's that particular person, and every time you have a conversation with them, you walk away feeling drained. Like, that's an example of energy. Or you might know yourself, like you're in a role and you wake up feeling energized and you go to work and you love your job and you come home with more energy. Or for some people, and I know I definitely experienced this in my role at some stage, I would go to work and I would come home feeling so drained that I would need to go and have a moment, like half an hour to myself or 20 minutes to myself before I interacted with the kids, because I just felt so drained. Like, that's energy. And understanding the different human design profiles and the different energy types, and working with our own energy type, we can help combat those feelings of burnout. So understanding energy patterns. And it also helps us to understand where we compensate. So, you know, it's like most profile tools, we've got our strengths and we've got the areas that we can work on. And it helps us to understand where we overcompensate, where we might even people please, or where we might even over control. So it's a really beautiful framework. And when I've shared it with a number of senior leaders, they've said, I sort of already knew, they will often say, already knew this about myself, but I didn't necessarily have the words or the framework to understand it.
Yeah.
And now that I've got the framework to understand it, it helps me to maybe be more confident in being who I am.
Great. And I will definitely go back to the whole yes thing and all of that. But why use human design and leadership development? So what gap does it feel that traditional leadership frameworks don't? I think you touched on that, but I wanted to go just a little bit deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's really important about this is it really helps you understand what we were talking about before, our patterns.
Yeah.
So it helps us understand what patterns are there. It's a different lens to other. It's a different lens to other leadership frameworks. So it looks at how we process information, how we deal with new ideas, how we deal with complexity. It looks at, like, a lot of leadership frameworks will give you a communication sort of framework. It looks at communication. It also can give you clues about, are you naturally self-confident, or you somebody who, like myself, can feel confident, but then the next day, like, have this feeling of imposter syndrome. And there's actually these keys and information within human design that can point to that. Sense of direction is another key. Also, emotion, like how we process emotions, because some people in human design will have what's called an emotional wave. So they do have highs and lows, and that's who they are naturally. And then there are other people who have the undefined, what they call solar plexus, and they're not emotional, and they actually can't understand the people who are emotional. They're like, what is wrong with them? Why have they got these waves? And so when we start to teach this to leaders and help them to understand, okay, some people in your team are going to be emotional, they're going to have waves, and it just creates this greater sense of empathy and understanding. And you touched on it before. It's like, when we're just working with the individual, we can get the individual results. But when we look at the team and look at the team whole, like, I think I don't want to get the quote wrong, but it's something like the sum of the individuals is greater than the whole, or I feel like I've got that wrong. But there's that quote to say that, like, when we come together and when we understand everyone's human designs, what it can do is it can reduce friction. So in the absence of understanding unique designs and unique communication styles, there can be frustration that somebody's not doing something the way we would expect them to do, or particularly with decision making. For some people, they might need more time to make a decision. For some people, they're going to be really quick to make decisions. So the people who are super quick to make decisions, they're going to get super frustrated at the people who need a little bit more time. And frustration creates tension, and tension takes us away from the goal, and things take longer, as opposed to we're all working in alignment, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think that on top of that, there's so many other layers to that, like in terms of the emotional cycles, for example. As women, we already have even more emotional cycles than the men, and then layer that on top of the human design when you are maybe a little bit more emotional. Going back to the needing so many yeses, I think especially women, when it comes to job applications, they may be 80% qualified for a role and still feel they need more yeses, while a man may be only 25% qualified, but they just go for it.
Yeah. That particular research that you're touching on, and there was another piece of research that came out, which were both the two drivers for me to start the Women in Leadership in IT program that I did at IT at Woolworths back in 2019, and it's still running today. And we call it Mentoring Moments, and it mirrored my journey. It said that men will come out of university feeling more confident, and women will come out feeling less confident, but will grow their confidence over time to the point where they hit around 30, 40, confidence grows, and then almost in their 50s, which I realize now, I didn't really realize at the time, but in their 50s, they become more confident. It's probably because perimenopause hits and the filter, like the I don't care anymore filter, just comes in, and they just become even more of authentic person. So their confidence rises, where actually men's drops. And the research that you touched on is that yeah, women might be able to do 80% of the job, but we'll look at the 20% and go, well, I can't apply for it. Men will look at the same role, I can do 50%, I'm going to go for that. And so when the men take the role, they've got 50% bandwidth they can grow in. So they're growing more in roles, whereas women who are taking roles where they've got 90% of the qualifications, they're only growing 10%. And so there's this real mixture of growth. And I think had I understood my human design earlier, had I understood my strengths profile earlier, had I understood my NLP rep systems and that I'm actually auditory, I'm not visual earlier, all of those things would have helped me to build that self-trust so that when I had those inner compass moments, the yes, the no's, I would have trusted myself to follow them. So that's why I love using these tools and combining them together to support leaders.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, again, trauma has a little bit to do with that as well, because, for example, people that can make decisions quicker very often also have a traumatic experience where they had to act from a survival mode and had to make a decision right there and then get frustrated with people that do take a little bit longer. So yeah, I love all the layering of all of this. So looking at every
Yes.
sort of aspect of that and combining that and then working with people through that.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to, you sort of said why human design, or how is human design different to other leadership frameworks? I feel like leadership frameworks look at the capability. So when we look at leadership capabilities, communication, decision making, influencing, developing people, it looks at the capabilities. But human design looks at the person, and it's the responses, and it's what is triggering us in those moments. What are the patterns? How is the nervous system wired to respond?
Yeah.
So that's really the differentiator for me. It's the missing piece, like the leadership development that I got throughout my time at Woolworths, even with brain-based leadership, even with neurolinguistics, NLP. They were all great intellectual frameworks and processes, but they miss the part of the person and the actual leader themselves and how they lead and their energy.
Yeah. I agree with that. So when a leader becomes more regulated, more self-aware, knows a bit more about their human design and how they sort of act, react, how they better communicate, what changes first in their team?
I've got a great example from a head of that I worked with, and he was going in. He was what's called a projector, and so there's different types. So there's manifestors, manifesting generators, projectors, and reflectors. So generators are your energizer bunnies. They got lots of energy, get things done, and your mani-gens come up with a lot of ideas, but your projectors are really, really interesting, and their energy type is to sort of guide the energy, or sort of guide the decisions, guide the leadership, guide the team. But they have a different challenge to some of the other profile types in that they actually have to wait for an invitation. So a projector can be in a very senior role in an organization and have really good ideas, have great past experience, and share it at the table. But if the energy hasn't asked them for their opinion or invited them in, this person will often feel like that it's falling on deaf ears, or it'll be like, why are people not listening to me? So it can be very frustrating for them. And so I worked with this particular projector who was in a very senior position. There was two things going on with him. So he was a projector and he needed to wait for the invitation, or he needed to wait for the right moment around the table to share his ideas. The other thing was he was also kinesthetic. So he was very feeling, but his CEO was very visual. So a visual person, moves quick and wants to see the information, process it in their mind, make a decision and move. The kinesthetic, so kinesthetic is feeling, they want to know that it feels good or it feels right, or that when the CEO's like got the information, they feel like we've done a good job. And so I worked with him to go, okay, let's change the way you're giving the information. Let's look for the invitations. Like it was a tweak and a nuance. And then I was also like, okay, and now we're going to get you more visual. So we're going to get your information on a one pager, all the information there, and we're going to give it to your visual boss. And the feedback he got was, and also when I taught him to regulate and we identified his patterns, like his peers noticed. They were like, they came up to him and said, like, what's going on? Like, what's changed? Like, you're really different. Like the way that he was showing up, they were noticing a shift in him. He started to have more of a voice at the table. He started to have more influence. Ideas that he was bringing to the table were being taken forward and implemented because we made these small shifts with both his communication style and also his human design.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really good outcome. Amazing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've talked so much about human design, and yes, when you were touching on the projector and the
Yeah.
other types, let's just quickly unpack a couple of those. So,
Yeah.
and the reason I honestly completely zoned out with that one is that I, have a little bit of an understanding of the different types. So, but for the listeners who don't, and they're still with us, talk
Perfect.
about the different types.
We'll get them to know. And yeah, if anyone is listening, they can head over to my Instagram, which is Kathryn Van Der Steege. And if they just want to send me a DM design, I will send them the link to run their own report, which will both give them insights. And I'm happy to give them each a little bit of an insight as well. And look, this is one of the reasons if we start to go too heavy into all of the elements, it can get really overwhelming.
Yeah.
I think I touched on it slightly. Your money gens they're your initiators, they're your strategists, they're your innovators. So they're the chief innovation officers. So they're coming up with the ideas and they're really the future thinking. Your generators they're your doers, like they're your energizer bunnies. They're the people who they have to work on what they love in order to generate more energy. If they're working on projects, pieces of work, or in roles that they do not love and does not light them up, they will feel very drained. So they will come home at the end of the day really exhausted. So anyone who is experiencing burnout or chronic fatigue, go back and have a look. Do you actually love what you're doing? Because maybe you're a generator and maybe you're in the wrong work. Projectors we've just touched on, they need to guide the energy. But a really important thing for projectors is because we're with our generators who have that defined center and energizer bunny energy, and when they work on things they love, they get more energy. Projectors don't have a consistent access to their life force energy. So your projectors are the people who actually genuinely probably need a nana nap at 2 p.m. every day to recharge. So they're exhausted by 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And in this always on society, this always on culture, this performance culture, like it's really would be frowned upon for someone to sort of need a rest or be tired. Like there's almost this expectation that we should be doing more, going harder. And for the projectors, it's just an absolute recipe for burnout. And the last one in the design is the reflectors. So these are really rare, and there's only 1% of the population who are reflectors.
Mm-hmm.
However, the reflectors, their decision-making style is they need to wait a lunar cycle. So they actually need to wait 28 days to make a decision.
Nice.
And so this is where it becomes really important to understand, because I'm actually married to a reflector, and I found this out about after 15 years of marriage. And I was like, okay, this is starting to make sense now why things don't necessarily move ahead around our house. And also with my pattern of outsourcing a lot of my decision making to him, stuff didn't get done. So that's another way how I've had to tune my own inner compass, being married to a reflector, is okay, if I get the yes, don't go to him and ask, should we do it? Get the yes and move, as long as it's within bounds. So look, that's just really high level, touching on some of the profiles. I think, as I talked on before, there's all different aspects to each of the centers. So there's 9 centers. Someone who has an open crown needs to be out in the world to get inspiration. So I'm an open crown person. So if I was to sit in this office and work for 5 days a week, I will get to the point where I get a lot of mental blocks. So mental blocks, just don't know what to do. The answers aren't coming through. If I literally walk outside of my office door and go for a walk around the block, go for a walk to the beach, walk down the local strip of shops, the ideas and the inspiration start flowing. So someone with a defined crown could sit there and get inspiration, all day long.
Yeah.
And then the other really key one that I've worked with that I see a lot of people is they have what I call a defined spleen. So they get those intuitive hits, but they override them with that open ajna, looking for all of the S's. So lots of really just super interesting pieces and keys within the human design that we can understand more about ourselves.
And I think it's great. I'm a generator myself, so I can definitely relate to having to love what you do, otherwise you get burned out. So there are even parts in my business where I'm sometimes like, okay, I would love to outsource this because this is really exhausting. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And for generators, and I'm wondering if you've experienced this, like, so there's signals to know when we're on track. So when we're in alignment with our energy or when we're not in alignment. So for the generator, we know we're in alignment when we feel really, really satisfied.
yeah.
Like when things feel really good, we're in alignment. And when we're not in alignment with our energy, we feel really, really frustrated. So frustrated, and everything just feels hard and frustrating. For the manifestors, if they're not in alignment, they're going to feel angry. Like they just feel angry about the world. And for those projectors, if they're not in their energetic alignment, they're going to feel bitter. Just, yeah, bitter. The words that came through was bitter and twisted. So, there's all these keys, right? So, Jen, for you as a generator, you can look at what are the things in my business, what are the things in my role, what are the things in my life that are really, really frustrating me right now? And then you can go and start to follow that thread and go, okay, how might this not be in alignment with who I naturally am according to my human design?
Yeah, yeah. And you were referring to your Instagram page earlier. I have actually done the profile. You've sent me back a really great report, so thank you for that. And I will pop the details into the show notes as well, so people that do want to give it a go, can reach out to you and do the profile and get a report for that as well.
Yeah. And just to touch on that, there's the standard human design report, which just tells them a bit about the centers and the things I've touched on if they're a generator. But the report I did for you was a special one specifically for leaders.
Yeah.
And so it's called a authentic leadership report.
Yeah.
And it goes much deeper into how you're meant to lead, your communication style. So yeah, if anyone's interested in doing that report for themselves, by all means reach out, because it's very rich and full of insights.
Yeah, it's definitely very rich. And I love all the insights and a lot of confirmations in there as well, which is really, really great.
What was your biggest aha looking at that report?
God, there's so many. I think the biggest one was explaining like the defined centers a little bit clearer to me, and the undefined centers. So I never really understood in the past when people were doing a human design reading for me. It didn't quite land from that perspective. So this made it really, really clear for me. And I feel that was probably the most comprehensive in terms of defining things for me in a way that it was more digestible, if that makes sense. So I had human design readings done before, and there was so much where I'm like, I don't actually really understand what that means, and this one really outlined it nice and clear. So yes, thanks for that.
You're welcome. Great feedback to get.
So if a leader only took one insight from this conversation today, what should that be?
It would be, And it's so interesting because I just was aware of my conscious filter wanting to filter the first thing that came up. I'll say this because it'll be the people who are on the call that this drops in for that are meant to hear this. It is that you came in this lifetime with a soul role, and everybody has a unique gift and a unique gift to give to the world. And based on their human design, like only they have it. Only with their human design, their experiences, how they've applied the learnings, only they can give that gift to the world. And it would be that I want every leader just to remember you are unique. You have your own style of leadership that will serve different people. Like there's 8 billion people in the world, and not everybody is going to hear the same message in the same way. So there are people out there who are only going to thrive under your leadership. There are projects out there that are only going to be successful because you're running them. There are people out there who are only going to develop because you're developing them. So I would just encourage everyone to look at their human design and be a little, maybe for those who are a little bit closed off, I'd encourage them to be a little bit more open, and I'd invite them to be a bit more open. And for those who already know that there's a bit of a niggle, that there's more to what they're experiencing, have a look at your human design, because I think there'll be clues there for you for the answers that you're looking for.
Great. And if a leader listening today wanted to lead with more purpose and connection starting tomorrow, what is the one behavior they would need to change first and why?
Well, first of all, they need to know their human design and what their incarnation cross is and what their purpose is in this lifetime. But it's authenticity. It goes back to authenticity. So know your patterns. No, I know you asked for one. Know your patterns. It's self-leadership. So the answer is self-leadership. And then underneath self-leadership, there's a whole lot of things that go with that. Know your patterns, learn to regulate, know your human design, but self-leadership.
Great.
Self-leadership first. Yeah.
And last question, what's the first internal signal you notice when you are no longer leading from alignment, and how do you course correct?
Gosh, that is an amazing question. The first internal signal, when I'm no longer leading in alignment, I can feel a sense. I get this internal sense. I know that I'm not being a good person. I know that like patterns or judgment or self-sabotage is probably kicking in, and it's just this feeling. Yeah. I think you might have stumped me with that question.
Right.
That's a really good question. I love that. I think I need to go away and sit with that.
Perfect. Then I've done my job well.
Yes, you have.
Kathryn, thank you so much for being here today. I could actually keep going on and on for hours about this
Me
topic.
too.
And as I said to you before we started hit record, I really would love another session with you personally to go through my leadership profile. So we will take that offline. Thanks everyone for listening to this episode today. I will pop Kathryn's details into the show notes, and that way you can reach out to her as well. And yeah, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And just encourage everyone to jump onto Instagram and send me design in the DMs, and I'll send you the link, and let's get you your human design report today so that you can start leading from your design as well and your inner compass. Thank you so much for having me, Jen.
Thanks. Bye. Fantastic. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Beyond the Boardroom. I'm truly grateful to have you here. So if today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to follow the show, leave a review, or share it with someone who'd find it valuable. Your support helps us spread the message of purposeful, connected leadership even further. So until next time, take care, stay curious, and lead with heart.